Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second day of the 2021 Prajnya 16 Days Campaign Against Gender Violence. And when I say this, and I tell you that it's our 11th campaign, every time I say it or write it, I do it with a little bit of shock, because we know how we've put these campaigns together year after year with donations from people like all of us, making do with some things, clapping together other things. So I'm just pleased that we can be here, but also it's a little dismal that so many of us have been doing this work all of our lives, and particularly on this issue. When I was born, there were already anti-dowry films, and then when I was a teenager, there were anti-dowry, Dowry Death films, and then there was some reference in serials. Then suddenly we stopped talking about dowry altogether, but every time you turned around, there were lavish weddings, and there's a wedding industry, and you can aspire to be a professional wedding planner. And I'm sure that's all very good from the point of view of the economy and livelihoods and so on. But what does that say about who we have once more become as people, and what we are capable of using our so-called progress and education and affluence for? So the idea, or not the idea, but the impulse, the imperative to have this panel comes from a great deal of anguish and distress that I have been feeling for a very long time, which came to a head a couple of years ago at a college workshop where we usually talk about different kinds of violence, and domestic violence is our closing point, because these are final year students and some of them will get married soon. I inserted a slide on dowry, actually thinking, done deal, old issue. And students came up and said, there's a law that prohibits dowry. We didn't know. And so this panel has been 2 or 3 years in the making, just wanting to do something about it. This year, 2021, makes 60 years since the passage of the law. And 60 years later, we're exactly where we were standing at that point, or so it seems. And so I'm really pleased that we were able to get such a wonderful panel together. And this is not one of those things that people always say. I mean it from the bottom of my toes. The 3 things that I really wanted to share with people who are much younger than me particularly, and may not remember other times and other struggles. I wanted people to learn about the law and what it says about dowry and dowry death and bride burning. I wanted them to have a sense of how hard the struggle has been to even get to the point where we have these laws, and why some of us feel so strongly about this. And I wanted them to have an understanding of why and how dowry, the practice, has been spreading, prevailing, how it links up with other social realities. Hence this panel. And then to pull it all together, I couldn't think of a better person than Ammu, to whom I'm now going to hand over the reins. Ammu is very hard to come up with words for you. Ammu is one of India's best known journalists, senior feminist, eminent writer, advisor to Prajnya, and a member of my family. And many of the things that I now say and do, I learned by watching Ammu and others do before me. So over to you, Ammu.
Thank you, Swarna, for that very over-the-top description. Good afternoon, everyone. As a long-time associate and admirer of Prajnya, I'm always happy to be part of any event organized by this tiny dynamo of a truly voluntary organization that punches way above its weight and has made valuable contributions to the debate on gender violence in India. It's a brilliant idea to revisit the dowry issue during the 60th anniversary of the Dowry Prohibition Act 1961. It is true, as Swarna just told us when she first wrote to us about this panel, that the discourse on and activism around the continuing, though banned, practice of dowry have been more or less missing in action over the past few years. At the same time, as she said, ostentatious weddings, at least some of them presumably accompanied by enormous dowries in cash and or kind, seem to have become far more common than they were earlier. So the spotlight on dowry during Prajna's 16 days campaign this year is additionally timely. As some of you may know, dowry deaths were among the 5 women's issues, to use terms from 3 decades ago, that Kalpana Sharma and I focused on in our scrutiny of media coverage of such issues, reported in the book Whose News? The Media and Women's Issues, first published in 1994. As we noted in the section on coverage of the issue in daily newspapers in English, we also covered general interest in women's magazines in English and had other contributors looking at the same categories in Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, and Gujarati. What we noted was that despite the campaign against dowry launched by women's groups in the late 1970s and early 80s, changes in the law and much writing in the press on the issue, the problem of dowry demands and the resultant harassment of young newlywed women continues. Many of you may be too young to remember that period, but you may be interested to know, as we've reported in the book, that media attention was first drawn to dowry deaths in 1978-79, when there were reports of an increasing number of deaths of young brides in kitchen accidents, which first came to light in Delhi and other parts of northern India. Since we have a representative of Shakthi Shalini with us on the panel, I thought I would also mention something else we noted in the book. Although the first of the deaths recognized as a case of bride burning occurred as early as 17 March 1979, when Kanchan Shashi Bala, a 24-year-old pregnant woman, died a hideous death from burns sustained in her marital home in Delhi. The first case to reach the media was the death of Tarvinder Kaur of Model Town, Delhi, on 17th of May of the same year. It was the demonstration outside the house of Tarvinder's in-laws that in fact brought Kanchan Shashi Bala's death to light. Her mother, Satirani Chadda, tracked down women's groups after reading about the demonstrations in the press and told them about her daughter's death 2 months earlier. As you may know, Satirani and Shah Jahan, both unfortunately now deceased, went on to set up Shakthi Shalini, which spearheaded the long fight for justice for victims of dowry murders and their families, and continues to be active in the field. Believe it or not, it was only on the 7th of March 2013, 34 years after the fiery death of Kanchan Shashi Bala, that the conviction of her husband, Subhash Chandra, for abetting the suicide of his wife was upheld by the Delhi High Court. Although Chandra was found guilty several years earlier, he was never arrested, successfully avoiding arrest for years. Maybe Bharati can tell us if he's still roaming around free or is finally being punished for his crime. Before I call upon the actual speakers of the day to share their thoughts on the situation today, I thought I would also mention that by the time the second updated edition of Whose News was published in 2006, interest in the subject had already begun to wane. As Kalpana and I noted then, a sense of ennui seems to have crept into media attitudes towards such deaths, whether dowry-related or not. Despite the persistence and indeed escalation and expansion of the problem that first came to public notice in the late 1970s, and despite the media's continuing fascination with violence, dowry deaths seem to have slipped off the media agenda. This is despite the fact that there is growing evidence substantiated by research of the widespread prevalence of diverse forms of violence. Diverse forms of violence against women within homes and families, of which dowry-related harassment and murder constitute a significant segment and one that is no longer restricted to certain parts of the country or particular communities. Okay, that's enough from me, at least for now. So I would like to call upon our first speaker, Akila R, to set the ball rolling. I think all speakers are aware that they've been requested to restrict their initial remarks to about 15 minutes. Brief bios of the speakers will be shared in the chat box. So I'll just say that Akila is a lawyer based in Chennai, who has been on the faculty of the National Law University, Delhi, the National Law School of India University in Bangalore, and the National Judicial Academy, Bhopal. So do go ahead, Akila.
Thank you. Thank you, Prajnya, for having me. And let me share my screen. Yeah. So I've been asked to provide an overview of the Dowry Prohibition Act and related provisions of law. And I will keep to my brief and try to keep it short so we can have follow-up discussions later. By way of introduction. So in addition to the Dowry Prohibition Act, there are several other laws. So when it comes to legal remedies for dowry demand or harassment, I just want to set the larger context that there are civil remedies available that were available even before the enactment of Dowry Prohibition Act, which was in the form of divorce and other matrimonial remedies, general remedies under civil laws, and now after the enactment of Domestic Violence Act in 2005. You can ask compensation or injunction and such others. But the focus today is going to be on the Dowry Prohibition Act and related criminal law provisions that have been enacted for this specific purpose, that is the continued prevalence of dowry in society. So if we go to the context of the Dowry Prohibition Act, what the law says as its object and reason is, of course, that it's been several years and this evil practice is not going anywhere. So how do you come across a situation? They say, we tried to introduce more property rights for women, but that in itself was insufficient. So a law which makes dowry punishable was considered desirable. So the object was to bring about some kind of deterrent effect by making dowry a punishable offense. And the second object of this law, according to the text itself, is granting property rights over the dowry and vesting it in the woman for whose benefit it was given. So these were supposed to be the two sort of objects of the act. And at that point, there also was the initial attempt to sort of define it, saying, you can have customary gifts, but only up to 2,000 rupees. And then there was also a critique of that, saying, but does that justify and legitimize gifts up to 2,000 rupees, etc.? But that went off quite soon. But so how does the Dowry Prohibition Act actualize these twin goals? One of deterrence and secondly of ensuring that women get property rights and own the dowry that was given on their behalf. This is through Section 3, which makes giving and taking of dowry an offense. The punishment has been enhanced now to more than 5 years and a fine. Now, what is interesting to me when I read this is that the law seems to accord the same weight of gravity to taking of dowry and giving of dowry. So this law seems to be willfully blind to the larger context of dowry. Because when you read the provision as well, it would speak of dowry being, property or gift that is given to either party to the marriage. So they are being, gender neutral and context neutral now. The implication or the premise seems to be that giving of dowry is also a choice in the same way that taking of dowry is a choice. So, Section 3, which is one of the primary provisions in the Act, says any person who gives or takes or abets the giving or taking of dowry is punishable with fairly serious punishment. Now, of course, punishment is made more stringent over the years, and if the court wants to award lesser punishment, they have to give specific reasons to justify why lesser punishment than what is mentioned in the law is given. So as I was saying, the idea behind Section 3 is something that equates giving of dowry and taking of dowry. And this attitude also, was observed by the Supreme Court, where in a more recent, I think like a 2005 judgment, where they say, the evil of dowry will end only when brides stop giving dowry and their families refuse to give dowry. So this is a slightly skewed understanding of the larger social practice, which I'm sure the other speakers will. So where there were attempts to amend the law saying that, giving of dowry need not be an offense. The sort of lawmaker said, no, this is going to be counterproductive. We cannot make, we have to retain giving of dowry as an offense. Coming next to giving and taking of dowry is an offense. What is dowry? Right? Dowry is property or any kind of valuable security given before, at, or after the marriage. So even if it's a gift that is given before the marriage, during the marriage, on the day of the marriage, or after the marriage, if it is in connection with the marriage, whether it is given directly by the parties to the marriage or the family members or gifts through other people, this is dowry. And of course, we know that giving or taking of this is an offense. But what are exempted from the purview of dowry are customary gifts. And also the presence should be, and the property that is given should be in connection with the marriage. And this has caused sort of significant difficulties in interpretation. The one Supreme Court judgment, which interpreted dowry death, again, the definition goes back to this Dowry Prohibition Act itself, says, well, we understand that, gifts that are given before the marriage and during the marriage will more easily be called dowry. But what is gift given after the marriage, right? It is an unending period. And they say that, of course, there could be customary gifts that are given, for festivals, for celebrating birth of a child and different other ceremonies. And those customary payments will not be considered dowry at all. So this was a rather literal interpretation of the law that has led to significant difficulties, where you are narrowing down the definition of ambit. So if someone asks for gifts upon birth of a child, upon ceremonies after the marriage, say the first Deepavali or the first Pongal, for example, in Tamil Nadu, are where customary gifts are demanded, are given. Those customary gifts may not be considered dowry according to this interpretation. So, and another exception to dowry are presents that are given and which are maintained in a list in accordance with a particular rules that I will talk about just in a minute. So where these are customary gifts that are given and the value is not excessive, considering the financial context of the parties, these presents are not considered dowry. So when it comes to other offenses under the Act, not just giving and taking, but demand of dowry itself is an offense that is punishable. And like I said, the Act prescribes minimum punishments for most provisions. And if the court wants to award an even lesser punishment than what is prescribed, they have to specify reasons and record it in the judgment. So demanding dowry directly or indirectly from the parents or other relatives is punishable. Please sort of I would like to note what I said earlier also about how the definition still is, kind of gender neutral and context neutral, which I frankly don't see the reason why it should be that. Section 4A specifies another offense where it says, any advertisement regarding dowry is also punishable. So if the family of a prospective bride, put in an advertisement in a newspaper or wherever else saying we will give X amount of dowry for this marriage, that is an offense. The newspaper or the media that publishes this and circulates this is also liable for punishment. Those provisions related to the first goal of the act, which was, deterrent effect of dowry by prescribing offenses and punishment. With regard to the second object of the law, which is property rights of women, we see section 5, 6, and 7 being relevant. Section 5 says that the agreement for giving and taking of dowry is void. So if at all, two families had agreed to solemnize a marriage, given certain dowry requirements, that agreement becomes void. It can't be enforced. Section 6 specifies that where dowry is given for the benefit of a girl, that property should be transferred in her name. She should have complete control over the property that is given as dowry. And again, failure to transfer this is again punishable. Now, section 7 is interesting because remember we said giving and taking of dowry is equally punishable and can be visited with even imprisonment. There is a limited immunity that is given to the aggrieved person. So if a wife, a bride, prefers a complaint under the Dowry Prohibition Act saying that she had given dowry and she was forced to give dowry, then giving of dowry itself being an offense, there is a limited immunity in that there will be no prosecution for her. This can lead to some difficulties because there is no immunity given to her family, right? But again, this has not been such a big problem because if somebody wants to, initiate action against a person who had given dowry, then there should be a complainant who admits to having received a dowry. And nobody wants to make that admission for obvious reasons. But still, in law, there is a bit of an ambiguity in that there is very limited immunity, and theoretically, action can be taken against the family who had given dowry. Section 8A says that burden of proof rests on the accused when it comes to prosecution for taking of dowry. So once there is a case which a complaint where a woman claims that dowry was taken, then it is for the husband and his family to prove that they did not take dowry. So how is the act enforced? And we know that the Dowry Prohibition Act largely is, observed only in its breach. But there are dowry prohibition officers that are appointed, and also there's an advisory board that is constituted under this act. And in the case of Tamil Nadu, the district social welfare officers are designated as dowry prohibition officers in each district, and they are to be assisted by an advisory board consisting of social workers. Now, the dowry prohibition officers have a lot of very important functions, which is, preventive and sort of creating awareness aspect of the Dowry Prohibition Act. They're supposed to hold camps. They're supposed to go and even visit, marriage sites and venues to ensure that there is no dowry that is given or taken. They can inquire into complaints that are made to them directly or which are referred from the police. And they also have to maintain a list of these presents. Now, this is very interesting because, again, this is a rule that is observed only in its breach. There is a dowry prohibition maintenance of presents to the bride and bridegroom rules of 1985. This is a central rule, so is applicable throughout India. And as early as 1985, this subordinate legislation basically said that both the bride and the groom have to maintain a list of presents that were given to them. Both parties should sign this and they should maintain this. Since 2004, there is a rule at the state level which says that the dowry prohibition officers in the state should maintain this list. So within 1 month of marriage, these lists are supposed to be submitted to the dowry prohibition officers. Again, observed only in its breach, and I can only imagine that this was supposed to be a bureaucratic sort of response and creating, another level of deterrence for dowry. As early as 1980s, there was an acknowledgement that the Dowry Prohibition Act had not been very successful, and this was observed in the Supreme Court as well. And around this time, there were attempts to also amend the IPC to create other offenses and bring in, stringent enforcement of dowry-related offenses. So the now infamous 498A of the Indian Penal Code was introduced. And here you will see that, any cruelty to a woman by her husband or the husband's family is punishable. And the definition of dowry is not the same as in the Dowry Prohibition Act. So when a woman is subjected to cruelty and harassment with an intent of extracting any money from her, is harassment, is 498A, and is an offense that is punishable in law. There is also dowry death, section 304B, which was introduced as a specific provision, which Ammu spoke about earlier. These were very hard fought for laws, hard fought by the women's movements. And dowry death is a provision which says if there's unnatural death of a woman within 7 years of her marriage, and if she was subject to any harassment or cruelty soon before her marriage, such death would be considered dowry death, presumed to be dowry death, making sort of prosecution a little bit easier because there is also a shift of burden of proof under the Evidence Act, etc. And this was punishable by 7 years. Tamil Nadu has recently passed a bill which increases the minimum penalty to even 10 years. So I just wanted to end my initial remarks with, how these acts are being enforced and perceived in this day and age. We have laws, we have, over time, sort of progressively increased minimal punishment even. But the reality is that, when it comes to enforcement of these laws, when it comes to taking cognizance of these complaints, law enforcement authorities and even courts are not necessarily allies of, victims of dowry. Police authorities, dowry prohibition officers, and even courts seem to approach this law with the presumption that, this is going to be a false complaint, that, these are disgruntled wives, that's the term that's used very often these days, that they are wielding these laws as weapons and they are preferring false complaints. This is contrary, and again, there is this rising, very harmful rhetoric of how the law is being abused, which runs contrary to statistics really, because we do have statistics which tell us that there is severe gross underreporting of crimes. We have statistics which tell us that dowry deaths are on the increase, number of complaints related to dowry harassment and dowry deaths are on the increase. And of course, conviction rates are low. But given this specific statistic that conviction rates are low, there is a very harmful rhetoric which is perpetuated, saying that therefore complaints are false. But we know that there's a very complex sort of social reason why conviction rates are low. That could be, general failure of the prosecution, biases in the system, right? Women being forced to withdraw their statements, etc. So I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, especially when it comes to 498A. So we now see a trend of courts and enforcement authorities trying to whittle the law rather than strengthen the law, and enforcement is definitely something that's suffering. I'll end here now. Maybe I can take questions later. I hope I did.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Akila, and also for sticking to the time. Now we will hear from Bharati Sharma, who has served as Honorary Secretary of Shakthi Shalini since 2010 and was earlier Associate Professor Social Work at the Jamia Millia Islamia University in Delhi. Your time starts now, Bharati. Yes, go ahead.
So thank you, Ammu. Thank you so much to Prajnya for inviting Shakthi Shalini and giving our version of understanding of dowry. Can I request for the first clip? See, I'm trying to show two small clips for us to see what has happened and how Shakthi Shalini came into being in relation to dowry. So can we have the first clip, which is of Satyarani Chadha, who was also an active member, who was the first person who started this organization along with Shahjahan Appa. So we have two small clips, one of Satyarani Chadha and one of Shahjahan Appa. Please carry on with the clip. Thank you.
ये आपने लिया ये सब आपको बुलाया जाता है
आंटी के साथ जाती हूँ, कौन सा प्रोफेशनल है, मेरे को कहाँ कैमरा में तो कहीं मैंने लॉ करना है। मैंने कहा ये बहुत बढ़िया लड़का मिल गया। कहती है तो लॉ तो फिर नहीं हो पाएगा और लड़के तो आ ही जाएंगे जो मेरे नसीब में है। मैंने कहा नहीं देता, मरवानी थी मरवा दी। मुझे तो यही है, मैंने मरवाई अपनी, चाहे कोई कुछ भी कहता है। लड़का मैंने देखा था, उसने तो नहीं देखा, वो तो कुछ नहीं जानते थे। मैंने 21 साल केस लड़ा है, कहने को होते हैं 21 साल। 21 साल 6 महीने बाद उसको सजा हुई, तो ये सब कहने लगे 7 साल की सजा हुई। तो ये सब मुझे कहने लगे चलो आंटी कुछ तो हुआ, मगर 2 महीने बाद हाई कोर्ट ने बेल दे दी।
जब ये सब होता है और आप कोर्ट में जाते हो, आपको गुस्सा नहीं आता है? तो
बहुत ज़्यादा आता है गुस्सा आने के लिए। मैं तो कहती हूँ रो पड़ती थी। और शाबाश है शक्ति शालिनी की एक स्टाफ का। मैं कहती थी क्यों मेरे पीछे पड़े हुए, तुम्हें क्या, तुम तो शक्ति शालिनी में बैठ गए ना। मेरी बेटी मरती ना ये शक्ति शालिनी बनती। मेरी बेटी मारी गई है और नहीं मरनी चाहिए, मगर मर तो रही है, मर रही है। देखिए तो हम फिर उनको लेटर डालेंगे कि आपकी वाइफ हमारे पास आई, हमने एक तरफा बात सुनी, आपसे भी सुनना चाहते हैं। फिर हम दूसरा लेटर थोड़ा सा जोर का डालेंगे कि आप आए नहीं, हम आगे कार्रवाई करने जा रहे हैं। फिर हम नोटिस दिलवाएंगे।
गलत पेज है। नहीं दिखा थी, ये तो गलत है, ये तो 1 घंटे की है। I think we can stop here. Thank you so much. This is the clip, which is a very long one. It's about an hour long clip. And so it can be viewed by people on their own. Shahjahan Appa's clip. There is one small clip of Shahjahan Appa. I think by mistake this clip is being shown. So don't worry about it. Let's forget it for now. So this was the background under which Satyarani Chadha, who was a homemaker, Shahjahan Appa, she was also a homemaker. And 2 homemakers, when their daughters were burnt alive due to dowry death, they came out and they took up the cudgels. And this is how Shakthi Shalini came into existence in 1987. This was the time of the feminist social movements, and this is where both these women, the founder of Shakthi Shalini, who were instrumental also in the act, Prohibition of Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act to come up, which came up in 2005. And there are certain provisions wherein both of them were responsible in coming ahead. Great advocate of feminism they were. Let's begin from there. So that was in 1987. The daughters were burnt alive, and the little beautiful description that was given by Ammu, which I will not like to repeat, but that was the background under which this organization came up. So then Dowry came up, Dowry Act came up in 1961. PGDB Act came up in 2005. Then let us understand what is dowry. The Act describes and understand dowry and understand the root cause of this particular phenomena that had taken place earlier, that was taking place, and that is taking place even now. So I would say that this particular cause lies in our social structure. This social structure, our social structure, Indian social structure, which is deeply entrenched in gender inequality, power imbalance, and obsolete gender norms, that all that undermines the mental and physical health of survivors, along with their dignity, their agency, their safety, and their autonomy. this is from where dowry, we are trying to expect that this society, this social structure that is entrenched with all these things will see that dowry is eradicated in this period of time? No. The law is a tool, and Akila has already told us how weak the law has been. Without talking much on this, which all of us know so very well, I would like to share experiences of Shakthi Shalini in relation to dowry. See, Shakthi Shalini works very broadly on gender and sexual violence issue. Now, we have our helpline, and we come across so many survivors who complain, and they reach us through our helplines, largely and otherwise through various other resources also. Social media also is one of the resources, and by word of mouth is another resource. So what has happened is that when a woman complains, we have so far not come across, I'm talking since 2010 onwards, we have not come across a woman telling us that I'm harassed on account of dowry. They talk about violence that they are suffering from. But dowry is never a reason why a woman comes up to us or the family of the woman reaches out to us. So it is very obvious that perhaps, and I even cannot say perhaps because I do not see it happening. Is it that our society is not aware of the Dowry Act? Is it that we do not want to talk about dowry? Is it that nothing happens if you go under the Dowry Act to the court? I think these are few of the many questions that we will have to dig out to see why people, at least in relation to our expenses, do not come up with the complaint of dowry. Yes, violence of every kind. And when we dig into, we come across some who would say, yes, the family asks for, go and get these things from your parents, go and get that thing from your parents and all that. But there is no understanding of dowry or dahej in Hindi. So nobody talks about that. So there is a big question mark in our mind as to we need to dig this up again after so many years of the act that has come into the picture. Second important thing that I would like to share here is that there have been so many women who would want to go in for litigation, but so far we have not come across, ever since that I'm over here, a single survivor asking, or a case of a single survivor that has gone under the Dowry Act. So everything is being taken care under the PGDB Act, and Dowry Act is never there. Then the question arises, is it necessary to have this act at all? What is the use of a legislation when it is not used? Does it not mean that something needs to be done to this legislation so that it becomes usable? Secondly, that our society knows there is evil of dowry still going on, and they are the perpetrators and they are the victims both. If I can quote in Hindi, please excuse me if somebody may not understand it. How do people ask their daughter-in-laws? No son-in-laws is asked for dowry. Only daughter-in-laws ask for dowry. So you see the gender inequality and see how it is trenched in our own society. So they say, oh, उनके वहां से तो बहुत सामान लेके आई थी जब बहू आई तब। ऐसा नहीं कहेंगे कि तुम कुछ नहीं लाई हो, मगर वो तो बहुत लेके आई थी। अच्छा, हमारे लड़के को सीए करना है, मगर तुम्हारे माँ बाप को बोलो कि फीस दे, क्योंकि आखिर में तो अल्टीमेटली it is you who would be happy because this is your family. There are many such instances that I can quote, how in very different manner people ask the daughter-in-law to get money from her parents after the marriage. Another thing that I would like to emphasize here is that what has been already talked about earlier, the kind of marriage. We don't want anything. बस आप हमारे रिश्तेदारों को गिफ्ट दे देना. Give gifts to our relatives. This is the list of relatives and give them these gifts. No dowry. Then make everybody happy. The kind of marriage you conduct, it should be such that everybody goes very happy from there. That happy, quote unquote, does not require to be detailed. Now, if this is the understanding about the dowry in our society, don't you think, and should not all of us think, as to we have to take this up again? This cudgels against dowry has to be taken up again. And well, the law can be modified, the law can be amended, anything can be done with the law, but the basic requirement is that we work at the level of the society, at the level of the community, because this particular evil cuts across the whole society. It doesn't see the economic class, it doesn't see the religion, it doesn't see the caste, it doesn't see anything. It's there everywhere. There will be very few communities in India that can be in the interior of India where there may not be any dowry situation. So I would suggest that with this Prajna's 16 days movement, let us wake up to the evil that is so entrenched in our society and get together and work on this at two levels, at the legal level, the act that is implementable, and second level would be at the level of the communities. That's what we in Shakthi Shalini we are doing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bharati. That was very interesting points you've made. Our last designated speaker of the day is Sharada Srinivasan, Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair in Gender Justice and Development, Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the University of Guelph. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, in Canada. Go ahead, Sharada.
Thanks, Ammu, it's going to be really a tough act following Akila and Bharati Sharma, after what they have said in the last half an hour. So I want to begin by thanking Prajnya for including me in this conversation. And it's been a while since I actually looked back at one of the papers that I wrote, which is specifically about the changing nature of dowry in Tamil Nadu. I used Tamil Nadu as my case study. So this conversation, this invitation actually gave me the opportunity to go back and look at the paper because I've been asked to speak about, what explains the persistence or even worsening of the practice of dowry in spite of the law. It might have its weaknesses, but still it's quite an effective tool if it were to be used effectively. So I did go back to the paper, and honestly, when I looked at the paper, I said, what has changed, right? So it's pretty much what I had written in. This was published in 2005 and based on fieldwork in 2001 and 2 in Salem district in Tamil Nadu. And this was part of the larger question of how practices like female infanticide come to happen in Tamil Nadu, which were earlier where it just didn't happen, right? So as part of that research, I did look at how the changing nature of dowry is one of the key factors in explaining the rise of discrimination against daughters, and one of the forms that this discrimination manifested itself was in their elimination. So I think it's useful for me to begin with reading the abstract of the paper. And please bear in mind, this was fieldwork done in 2001-2, and the paper was published in 2005. And the paper itself is based on ethnographic fieldwork that I undertook in one of the villages in Salem district. Significant changes have occurred in the practice of dowry in South India. From being an upper caste class practice, dowry has become an all caste class phenomenon, replacing the symbolic exchange of gifts between families of the groom and the bride. It has become a euphemism for strategies to acquire higher standards of material life, status, and security, with negative consequences to women's status, including their survival. The anti-female bias of the practice cannot be tackled from within the dowry trap. Raising the critical consciousness of women about their identity and self-esteem remains a critical component of effective strategies. So, I asked myself, okay, 15, 20 years later, what has changed? I could very well be writing that paper now, and I think the abstract would pretty much be the same. So what I'm going to try and do in the remaining 12 minutes or so is really talk about 3 points. First is the sort of manifestation, the current manifestation of dowry, because I think that context needs to be established before we talk about how this has come about and how do we get out of it. And most of what I'm going to say is not going to be new, especially to this quite well-informed audience. But I think it's a key reminder of how embedded and how immersed all of us are in some of these processes that keep practices such as dowry alive, right? It's a good reminder that that's what makes it so hard to say, let's get rid of it, and tomorrow you wake up and it is gone. So that's why it is so challenging to get rid of a practice like dowry. So just to start with talking about what the current situation of dowry is. If 60 years later, we are talking about the ineffectiveness of a law, it just tells me that a practice like dowry simply cannot thrive without the collusion and involvement of women and their families. So please bear with me. I'm not throwing all of the responsibility onto women and their families, but there is a way in which the groom and their families and women and their families are all colluded and involved in keeping this practice alive, right? So what is dowry? Quite different from what Akila laid out as the definition in the law. In common parlance, whether it is in the North or in the South, people understand it to be substantive gifts that are given at the time of wedding, but also customary gifts that are given throughout the woman's life and that of her children. So, while the law itself talks about only wedding-related gifts, the practice in common parlance, the understanding is dowry is what you keep giving to a daughter's marital family throughout her life and even beyond her life for her children. So these are gifts from the girl's family to the groom. Often people say, oh, it's the opposite of bride price. It is not the opposite of bride price. In bride price, the directions, whereas in dowry, both the woman and the gifts move in one direction towards the groom and their family. While there is considerable, it's quite common that the jewelry actually belongs to the woman. In reality, she may not have much independent control over the jewelry. Of what she decides to do or not to do with the jewelry is often not her own autonomous decision. And again, in common parlance, and in policy circles, and among many parliamentarians and others, it's often seen as a substitute for inheritance. It is not a substitute for women's property rights or inheritance. And I think this needs to be established clearly, because the way out of all of this is really to strengthen women's property rights and inheritance. That is really the way to to be fighting dowry, because, like I said, we cannot fight dowry by being within the dowry trap, right? We have to give dowry so that our daughter will have a happy life. She has to be married. Chalo, so let's give dowry. And then I can't go on campaigning against dowry. These two things don't really happen. So the one clear way that legally it is now possible is the amendment of the Hindu inheritance, which allows for daughters to equally inherit ancestral property. So that, I think, is really the key to counter the practice of dowry. And I'm very well aware that this is easier said than done, because even today people say, the women themselves say, look, I got so much of jewelry during my wedding. So my brother needs to have this little plot of land, and he has his own family and mouths to feed. So it would be unfair on my part to demand a share in that piece of land. But then the thing really is to say, I do not want jewelry. I do want a piece of that land, because I'm sure all of you by now know the value of real estate in India or in any part of the world. So it doesn't compare with the value of gold. Okay, having said that, the next thing I want to really emphasize, and I think Bharati explained that quite forcefully through the example of the cases that Shakthi Shalini deals with. Dowry is not simply a gift. It is a strategy for status mobility, which is engaged by grooms, their families, as well as women and their families. So it's no longer limited to grooms and their families. And it is not an explicit demand of you have to do so many things for us, but these are all really a play on people's emotions and really enticing the consumer in people. And the way a lot of this is played along is really along two lines. First is what again Bharati very nicely articulated, is this thing of, we are asking for all of this because ultimately it is your daughter and her family that are going to enjoy these benefits. So this is one line that is often used. The second line that is often used is of course where there are brothers, also cousins, the groom's family saying, so and so did so much and so so much. So somewhere there is a huge pressure on the women and their families to either match up what has already been done, and even better, to beat what dowry has been brought by the older brother or somebody else in the family, right? So it is also a way of, dowry is also a way of then demonstrating that that this is a competitive way of demonstrating and asserting the woman's status in the marital household. But does it really mean that the younger daughter-in-law is that just because she brings a larger dowry, does she have more of a say in the household? Yes and no. And I'm happy to answer that question if it comes up in the Q&A, because we did some work around that, the relationship between dowry and domestic violence, which I'm happy to talk about. In effect, there are hierarchies of dowry. So we cannot homogenize all men, we cannot homogenize all women, and nor can we homogenize all dowries, right? So that again, I will come back to in talking about how did we get to this situation. Now, very often in North India, but also in some parts of Tamil Nadu where I've done field work, people have always said, there is a shortage of brides because of the practice of sex-selective abortion or daughter elimination, and this would lead to a decline in dowry. And none more than someone like Madhu Kishwar, has actually talked about these things. But no, the shortage of brides and the demand for dowry actually operate on really parallel tracks. So the demand for high status grooms has not gone down, right? And therefore, if you need a high status groom, it means you have to be willing to give a higher dowry. And this is where women and their families, once women have had some level of education, if it is an undergraduate degree or an MCOM or a doctor's medical degree, then it's like, I need to be married to a medical doctor, or the family thinks the daughter has to be married to a medical doctor. And there is a price attached to this medical doctor groom. And so what we are seeing is really the shortage of brides and the demand for high status grooms actually operating along parallel tracks. And this is hypergamy, right? Because women always want to marry up. And people have resorted to evolutionary biology to explain that that this is not a social behavior. This is sort of a natural behavior. And of course, we have to be very, very careful going down this dangerous path on insisting that women marrying higher up is a natural behavior. I think it is a social behavior. It is a learned behavior. The other thing that has changed the current context is weddings, especially in South India, are no longer a one event or a one-day affair. Now I think middle-class weddings pretty much are a 3-day event with Sangeet and Mehendi and things like that into Tamil weddings. So I'm talking about Tamil Nadu. And these events are often held at different venues, again, showing the sort of the status of both the girl's family and the groom's family. Events like Sangeet and Mehendi were not part of Tamil weddings. And these are recent additions. Even when I did my fieldwork in 2000, 2005, nobody talked about Sangeet and Mehendi. I have now attended a couple of weddings in my family. And of course, you know, there is the Sangeet, there is the Mehendi, there are all sorts of things that are added to this. And so it is discomforting to see such extravagant, ostentatious events. And of course, we all know one of the things that's increasingly happening is what's called the destination weddings. Again, this middle class, upper middle class, really talking about how do we get out of and make the wedding the one-time event in our life really memorable, right? And that's the other emotional string that's played along. You know, should we be spending so much? I might not wear this sari or this dress beyond that one event, but it is exactly the same thing, right? You're going to be doing it only once in your lifetime, so why not, right? So that emotional tug you see in advertisements, in the way families, friends, and everybody puts pressure on the groom and the bride to engage in this sort of extravagant behavior. The demand for gold at the personal level has simply not declined. It has intensified. India is the largest consumer of gold at the individual level, and that is not about to wane at all. And you know, gone are the days when men and grooms and their families were solely the ones who were making the demands, either directly or through relatives or through friends or through the marriage broker. Now, women themselves are at the forefront of actually wanting ostentatious weddings, the demand for goods, and extravagant lifestyles. This is not all women. So this brings me to the second part of my presentation, which is how has all this come about? And again, no surprises at all. It is two things that are happening simultaneously, or you know, let's say three things that are happening simultaneously in countries like India. And let's focus on what's happening in India. First is the exceptional rise in consumerism and the availability of consumer goods. The second is rising aspirations, partly through the opening up of the economy, being exposed to all sorts of things on television, on films, through social media. And social media by far today has the biggest influence, and people are able to get a lot of information at their fingertip. A lot of this information is useful, but a lot of this information is also harmful. So it is consumerism, rising aspirations in the context of widening inequality. And you know, we don't talk much about inequality, right? The top 10% of Indian population holds 77% of total national wealth. 73% of the wealth generated in 2017 went to the richest 1%, while 67 million Indians who comprise the poorest half of the population saw only a 1% increase in their wealth. This is an Oxfam report on inequality. So when Ambani is celebrating his daughter's wedding, please let's not use that as a model to talk about how, you know, in their wedding, they actually brought all the arts and crafts, the artists and craft makers, and had a Dilli Haath kind of a thing where, you know, these craftsmen, the craftspeople and artists were able to sell their produce directly to people like, you know, the Clinton, you know, Hillary Clintons of the world, right? So that cannot be used as a model or a way to actually emulate. And while lack of income is an important aspect, how do we meet aspirations? Every company, every product comes with a loan, EMIs, making consumption of expensive goods seemingly affordable, but this only traps people into a lifelong debt crisis. So I think this is sort of something that I think is really, I mean, nothing new to anyone who is listening to this presentation. But there is very little focus on how personal lifestyles, consumption contributes to, increased violence against women, or threat against, or the threat of plastic and clothing and the connections to global warming, right? In the West, these things are beginning to happen, but we don't see any of this in our education system, whether at the school education or at the university education. The emphasis is so much really on how can you as an individual be successful, and that is really by getting better grades and a better job, and if possible, settling abroad or getting a higher income in India. So creating that little bubble around you so you can really be oblivious of what's happening around us. And the one point that I want to really emphasize here is women's empowerment. In the last 2 decades, we have seen enormous increases in women's education levels. And in many universities and schools, women outnumber men and boys in terms of their enrollment. And in South India, in the areas where I do field work, and in Punjab, women are able to say, they do have a say in marriage of who I can marry or who I do not want to marry. So this idea of empowerment is actually working. So the ability to exercise choice, or the expansion of choices, is actually happening. But a lot of these are actually driving dowry, especially in the middle class and those living in urban areas. Those who can afford often think that it is their right and there is nothing wrong in giving dowry. I mean, what's wrong if we can give it? This creates enormous pressure to imitate among those who have less, and it makes it extremely difficult for them to actually get out. So the last point that I want to make is, how do we change this? The first point is what I made at the start is really how do we promote and strengthen women's inheritance rights? So dowry is not seen as a substitute for inheritance. The second aspect is this notion that daughters are a burden and that they have to be handed over from parents to a husband. That notion has to change among parents, among daughters themselves, and of course, among fathers and men. And this, of course, needs that we work with men as well. And without working with men, and I think in this audience, I probably saw maybe one man in the audience. So I think there is work to be done at all levels, but the education system has changed in a way that is unrecognizable from the time that I was in school. But I think the education system also has to really balance between individual liberalism and collective responsibility. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharada. That was really interesting. In fact, thanks very much to all the speakers for their very interesting contributions to the discussion from their diverse viewpoints of law, activism, and academia. Before we open up the floor to participants to add their questions, comments, observations, and insights into the mix, I would like to actually ask the three of you if you would like to respond or add to what the other speakers have said, or would like to very briefly clarify or expand on what you yourselves have said. So, but all very briefly, because we don't really want to eat into the audience interaction session. Meanwhile, participants can post questions, etc., in the chat box if you haven't already done so. And I just have one question that occurred to me while I was listening to Akila and Bharati, was actually brought up as a point by Sharada, and that is about whether or not equality in inheritance would make a dent on the practice of dowry. In my understanding, Hindu personal law has already moved in that direction. Has that reduced the incidence of dowry? Also, what about those who don't have ancestral or even self-acquired property? And something that's often brought up in the community I come from, to which Mary Roy belonged, the economic consequences of dividing land. Sharada, I see that your hand is up. Would you like to start?
Sure. I mean, I think very often when we talk about promoting women's inheritance rights, people always say, what about families that don't have any land? Let's be very mindful that a lot of this sensitization is happening. The sort of role models or the people that those who don't have emulate are, people who have, right? So if somebody who has something like this, I studied with her and they did this, so let me also do it. So I think we need to really begin with those that do have land, and the inheritance law is supposed to work for them. Is it working for them? And how do we effectively make it work for them? And like so many laws, the amendment happened in early 2000s, that women can actually daughters can demand their share of ancestral land. Are women going to ask for it? Are they asking for it now, about 15 years later? No, they are not. But this is where I think, the awareness and the sort of conscientization has to happen. And when we're talking about land being divided, land is really not being taken away, right? It is still there, and there are very good examples that someone like Beena Agarwal is currently documenting across the country to show how even small parcels of land can be can have very high levels of productivity and result in women's empowerment. There's some exceptional papers that she has published based on this empirical data. And there are tons of NGOs which are actually working on women farmers and their land rights, right? So I think focusing on people who don't have property, I don't think does justice to either of them, right? So I feel that, families that have land are often the ones that are giving out large dowries, and they set the trap for everybody else to follow. So the sensitization still happens. And if we have to break that chain, then, we have to push for the inheritance rights.
Okay. Bharati, I see that your hand is up.
I go by whatever Sharada has said, but I think it is very important that we work at the grassroots level to bring about this change in the mindset. That is definitely work not only with the men, but also the women, because the women are themselves also equally patriarchal. So it is very important that we have to devise different kinds of methods and strategies to work with different classes and groups of people to bring about this change. Because generally what is happening is, because my parents have to marry me off and have to give this much of thing, how can I ask shared as it was already narrated in the property? So this is that weakness, that why do you give dowry? Why do you want to accept a man who wants to, only very empowered people can do this, not everybody can do it, but this is where we have to work. Unless we work at this level, I think it is going to be very difficult to bring about changes in this particular kind of matter. Thank you.
And I guess that's one of the things that Sharada mentioned, that in the educational system, etc., that's one place to start. Akila, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to add to what the earlier speakers have said, I agree with them fully in that changes to property laws, where now women can largely, largely have the same property rights as men, with some, exceptions here and there, but that hasn't been successful in, changing the social evil. So there definitely is an aspect of Sanskritization where, there's this deeply entrenched idea of how a woman has to be married off, and patriarchy is the gift that keeps on giving. So all communities have now moved to that track. So unless there is a rethinking of, how families are structured and how relationships are structured, I think it's just, property rights and laws are not sufficient, and we've seen that.
Okay, I see that there's a comment in the chat box. Sujata Modi says, somehow in my experience, new laws relating to equality in inheritance do not prevent dowry. In many places, women are working to save towards their marriages. That's true. So would anybody like to respond to that?
I mean, yes, that's totally right. Just because we have equality, that daughters can inherit equally, it doesn't mean that dowry has vanished. It's happening, right? And very often women are saying, look, I think I gave the example of how they themselves are forfeiting the right to property because out of affection, but also they don't want to lose their brother's support, right? And very often the family says, if you ask for your share of property, well, that's the end of your relationship with us. And I think, yeah, women are also saving up for their marriage, and many of them, who are working are doing this. But again, this goes back to this thing of, I mean, I started working on daughter discrimination and daughter elimination since 1999. And how much of this idea that daughters are a burden has changed in these over these 20 odd years? Not much, right? So as long as we feel that if you are born a woman, you have to end up in a marriage, you have to end up, that's what parents think. So as long as parents and women themselves think, oh, I need to be married, and then whatever happens after marriage, as long as that is the sort of the goal in life, we are going to be confronted with these sorts of problems. Women are going to be exceptionally vulnerable. This is not to say that nobody should marry. I'm not making any such radical proposition. But the point is marriage just another milestone in life? Can I be educated? Is it like my education, my work, and marriage that I'm not giving up one for the other? Right. And very often, and now, women's labor force participation in India, especially of educated women, is so low. People like Padmini Swaminathan have written extensively about it, that, you wonder what's happening. These women are supposed to be empowered with education, higher education, and so on and so forth, but they're giving up employment because they want to get married. Right. So I think it's those sorts of, how non-negative marriage in women's life, that idea has to change. Then we are going over.
I think you're having some connectivity problems. Oh, have you finished?
Yes, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I just intervene briefly? So what Bharati Sharma said earlier really resonates, where she said, dowry is not understood to be wrong, but dowry harassment is understood to be wrong. So I think it's where dowry is now so well entrenched that it seems to be a part of our culture, which we are unable to break away from. So we are only focusing on, well, is there violence that's attached to the demand, right, and harassment? So unless we understand dowry itself to be a problem, it's quite a difficult way out.
And also another, the examples that Bharati gave of the subtle ways in which demands have changed. It's no longer bring a scooter, bring a television, and all that kind of thing. But, these kind of taunts about others who gave more dowry, or hints about, paying for the husband's education because it'll be better for everyone all around, gifts for the family, make everyone happy going from the wedding. I mean, these kind of more subtle ways which you can't pinpoint as much, pinpoint on as demands for dowry so much, So that also creates, I'm sure, some amount of confusion in people's minds. Are they really asking for more dowry, or are they just, is this just general conversation?
I also believe, Ammu, that education is not enlightening people. You get a degree, you get a certificate. Lot needs to be done at the education system, but at the same time, I tell you, highly educated girls want an ostentatious wedding. They also want to carry things with them when they get married, and they demand from their parents. So it's not one way, it's the whole, I think it's the whole thing. There's a poison that has permeated into the society so much that unless we work, and just do not depend on the education system, I assure you. It is very important that we work in, for an example, in the whole community, in the whole group at a time, men, boys, girls, and women. Unless we do this kind of integrated approach, it is going to be very difficult, because educated girls want it.
Yeah, actually, Sudha Roli has said as much in the chats. Even the girls want to have extravagant marriages for which their parents spend lots of money and even getting loans for that. What is your observation on that? Of course, you have already addressed that. So there's one more question from Shakthi S. Could the panelists speak a bit more about how dowry intersects with caste? Specifically, how can we view the practice through the lens of Brahminical patriarchy? Who would like to take that first?
I can talk about it. The practice of dowry has been happening among Brahmins long before the advent of the Dowry Act. And this idea that the wife givers and the wife takers, the distinction of that status, the fact that as someone who's giving the wife, you will always have a lower status, is intrinsically part of Brahminical patriarchy. The rituals around every, not just marriage, but every other event, the number of rituals that are lined up through a woman's life cycle are all central aspects of Brahminical patriarchy, even if some Brahmins have moved away from it. I think we should not confuse these two. So what a lot of Salem, while there were no Brahmins in the village, the sort of most dominant caste group.
Sorry, Shraddha, could I just stop you for a minute? Because you froze for a minute, at least for me. So could you go back a little?
Yeah, I think I will turn off my video. So in the village where I was doing my fieldwork in Salem, there were no Brahmins or no Brahmin households or so on and so forth. But the dominant caste in the village, which is a landowning caste, which is officially designated as the backward caste, where they themselves and people from the other castes saw them as very close to Brahmins. They are exceptionally Brahminical in the sort of things that they do in their everyday practices and when it comes to rituals. And most importantly, most non-Brahmin castes, at least in Tamil Nadu, are fine with widow remarriage, the practice of widow remarriage. But a lot of these castes, as they move up the social hierarchy, feel that they should not practice widow remarriage. So then the idea that a widow is in white sari and has this visible signs that she is a widow is practiced by a lot of these laws. So these are all practices of Brahminical patriarchy. And a lot of this really manifests in the everyday realities, especially of women. So when we talk about Sanskritization, dowry is only one part of the Sanskritization process, right? Brahmins have always been giving dowry, so let's also give dowry. If I cannot be a Brahmin, I can at least do some of these practices by which, something will happen. There will be some transformation in my in the social recognition that is given to me within my context, right? So they are necessarily not competing with Brahmins, but they are competing within the local patriarchal context, right? And so there are several patriarchies there. And the one way to assert their form of patriarchy is by embracing practices of Brahminical patriarchy. I'm happy to share my paper with you all. I can send it to Prajnya and you could forward it to whoever wants it. Thank you very much.
Akila or Bharati, would you like to respond to the caste question?
Yeah. I think the context has been set out really well by Sharada, who has worked on this. What we see today is that, well, this is a practice that has been accepted now by many communities. So that aspect of, trying to sort of have some kind of social mobility by adopting these practices has happened. And we now see that almost all communities are using an endorsed dowry. But absolutely right in that it has its context in this kind of Sanskritization and Brahminical patriarchy.
I also believe that very importantly, the position of the woman is very, very low in all the societies and also Brahminical society. And that is the emergence of all these practices, because this is one way of controlling a woman. And this is also one way of showing the people that a man is superior. I think this is also very eminent in all these practices. Nobody wants a woman who can raise her voice, who can say, this is my choice. Who cares? So this aspect is so much entrenched in all the societies, rich or poor, even in terms of caste. This is there. So I think this is one thing which also needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Now there are two questions in the chat box. One is, there have been quite a few incidents reported by the media on weddings in lockdown and increase in cases of child marriage amidst the pandemic. Could any of the panelists shed light on the interlinkage of COVID-19 with the practice of dowry? This is Meghna Menon has asked this question. Would anybody be in a position to respond to that?
Can you just repeat it, please?
Quite a few incidents on weddings in lockdown and increase in child marriage in the midst of the pandemic. She wants to know, could any of the panelists shed light on the interlinkage of COVID-19 with the practice of dowry? Have you noticed anything at Shakthi Shalini?
We work with 5 communities very intensely. We have not noticed in these communities, but we have known there are these practices going around. They were going around during COVID period. And the whole idea was this, that because there is loss of job or reduced income, and this is the time it is easier to marry off the daughter with lesser money than when everything is normal. That's the time when they have to spend much more money. And so it is very easy to actually get rid of the daughter in her marriage right now during pandemic. Because it's not, you will have a very small group of people. You cannot have, you cannot spend a lot on the larger group and all those things, and restrictions in the movement and all this. So less money to be spent on the marriage now as compared to the normal times. This was one thing that we have noted. Yes, please.
There's a question from Sandhya Srinivasan. Nowadays, the girl's earning is set apart for her marriage expenses and for her gold jewelry at the time of marriage, I presume, without giving her a choice of making a decision on whether she wants to use her money or save it. Can the panelists share their opinion about this? Where obviously parents are sort of deciding how a girl's earnings should be spent, and often in marriage-related expenses. Does anyone have anything to say about this?
Ammu, can I say something?
Sure.
This is Sharada.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, that is a likely scenario. But again, I think not all young unmarried women are giving their incomes to their parents, right? So there is a diversity even in that. But there are women who hand over all their income to their families and they set them aside for presumably for their dowry. Then there are women who earn their incomes and they themselves are saving it up for their dowry. And a lot of these dowries, sort of the jewelry schemes that most jewelry companies operate, feed into this. Plus also I know in Tamil Nadu, in the garment sector areas, there is a scheme called the Sumangali Scheme where young girls, who are teenagers, are taken from poor families, are taken to work in the garment industry. So the industry gives them a place to stay. They are hostels to stay. And when the girls are 18-year-old and then they no longer can work in the factories, they get their wages paid as part of the Sumangali scheme with a little bit of interest. The name Sumangali Scheme, that name itself is no accident, right? The name has been chosen to show that you send your young unmarried daughter from a poor family to work in a factory, till she gets married. So it delays her marriage till about 18 years old. In many of these places, child marriage is early marriage is pretty rampant. And then, she gets some money with some interest, which can be used towards her marriage expenses and dowry. So there are all sorts of ways in which, women's employment, women's wages all play into the accumulation of dowry.
Yeah. You mentioned jewelry shops and companies, and almost every other day there's full page ads, especially during the festival season and the so-called marriage season. Full page ads with jewelry from neck to waist kind of thing. I mean, it's like, I'm amazed at how ugly some of that jewelry is, but also, I mean, obviously they have a market. And also, I mean, I don't know about other cities, but in Bangalore, it seems like jewelry shops are proliferating much faster than any other kind of shop. And they actually have customers, unlike many of the other fancy shops, like clothes, etc. So I think this whole, I mean, I presume a lot of it has to do with, some of it may have to do with this investment, but a lot of it probably has to do with this whole business of women having to have jewelry with them when they get married. Okay, 2 questions. Akanksha Kula says she would like to thank all the panelists for sharing such important insights. Her question is, what are some of the loopholes in the Prohibition of Dowry Act itself, and what more can be done to strengthen it? And there's 2 more questions. So Akila, would you like to quickly take that? Or Bharati?
Before Akila says, I will want Akila definitely, but I just want to tell you one thing in this particular aspect. That is our experience, and that is what I'm repeating here again. Whenever there is any litigation, it always goes under PGDB Act.
Can you just spell out that PGDB Act? I mean,
Protection of Women from Domestic Violence, 2005. Now, most of the litigations go under violence against women in this act. I would want to say, Akila, please correct me. You are the right person here. Why do not our advocates and lawyers also use domestic Dowry Act? So is it not important, Akila, that we need to educate our lawyers also, our legal system, that this is also the act then that can be used? I know there are loopholes. Well, those loopholes can be amended also. But isn't it, these are the two things that always bother me.
Akila, before you answer, I also want to know, is it the lawyers who decide or the police who decide under which law it's booked?
Ideally, the complainant decides, but we know it doesn't work that way. As in, the Domestic Violence Act and Dowry Prohibition Act are two parallel different remedies that are always available. While the Domestic Violence Act is a civil legislation that provides civil remedies, so if you want an injunction, if you want a protection order, if you want compensation, all of that can be achieved through the Domestic Violence Act. Dowry Prohibition Act is a criminal legislation. So the reason why there is very little cases filed under the Domestic Violence Act is partly also because the Dowry Prohibition, under the Dowry Prohibition Act, is that dowry prohibition officers at the district level are supposed to inquire, make reports, and then forward this case. A lot of people, including lawyers, don't know that there is this parallel process that is involved. So when you go to the police and you ask for a complaint to be registered, the police can register it under the Dowry Prohibition Act as well. But by and large, the practice is that it would then be referred to the dowry prohibition officer, who has to conduct inquiry and investigation and then forward this. So at least in Tamil Nadu, ma'am, the Dowry Prohibition Act is used when you go and prefer a complaint with the police authorities. Used Section 3, 4, etc. are used. So it is not that it is not used at all, but we know the difficulties that women face in approaching the police and asking for prosecution. There are a lot of hurdles there as well. And so yeah, that could be part of the reason why there are lesser numbers, but these are parallel remedies that are definitely available in law. In terms of what are the loopholes in the Dowry Act, I already spoke about the definitional difficulties, whereby there have been scores of cases where complaints led in acquittal because of the court's understanding that if it is a later demand, right? So for example, where the husband's family says husband has to buy a house, right, and you have to give money for that, or he needs something for business purposes or for the child's birth or year boarding or whatever else, courts sometimes do see them as not related to marriage and not being dowry. So that's the reason why 498A becomes more relevant, because even when there's harassment in seeking money, which is not dowry, that still is, harassment and an offense, but not necessarily under the Dowry Prohibition Act. Having said that, the more important difficulty under this is, again, there is such little understanding of dowry as inherently wrong. And, also perhaps some amount of fear, because under the act, giving and taking of dowry, like I said, is an equal offense. Perhaps people are deterred thinking, I gave dowry. So if I prefer a complaint, then it could come and affect me, because I could then be prosecuted for having given dowry. So that's probably one of the reasons why it is not invoked very much.
Okay, since we're entering the last 15 minutes of the session, and there are 3 questions I think I can see in chats. So what I think I'll do is, read out all of those questions, and then, all of you can decide which ones you'd like to answer. Sujata Modi asks, what is your impression about prominent personalities, movies, and cultural influencers, political and social context, which propels ideas of extravagant marriages? How do you see dowry as being normalized in the general cultural practice? How can we explain young women are still committing suicide because of harassment for dowry? How does one explain college-educated women committing suicide instead of simply walking out of a marriage? So that's Sujata Modi. Then Mariam from Prajnya has asked, she says, I may have missed this if Ms. Akila already talked about it, but is there any legislation in place that works to disincentivize giving and taking of dowry directly rather than addressing it through talking about dowry violence? Did you get that question? Is there any legislation that works to discourage giving and taking of dowry directly instead of always having to link it to dowry violence? And Swarna has, her comment is, I have actually been wondering about the correlation between the introduction of liberalization and the return of dowry and dowry variations. Would Bharati or Sharada like to reflect on this? For instance, where SEZs were introduced, etc. Are these new districts where the practice has spread? So these are the 3 questions. If you want me to repeat them, I can, or you can just read them in the chats.
The last one, Swarna's one, if you can repeat.
Oh, sorry.
We go in the order of the speakers. So Akila, Bharati, and then myself, please, to respond to any or all of the comments.
Okay, so maybe Akila can reply to Mariam's thing first about discouraging giving it.
Taking of dowry rather than dowry violence. Absolutely. This is exactly what Dowry Prohibition Act does. So in Dowry Prohibition Act, demand of dowry directly is an offense. Giving and taking of dowry are directly offenses not related to harassment or violence. Similarly, the Domestic Violence Act could also play a role where there is demand or any kind of dowry that is given. You can seek compensation, you can ask for restitution of whatever was given, etc. So these are legislations that exist. I'll leave the other questions to others. I don't want to.
Yeah. Okay. So there's one about the the influencers and prominent personalities and general culture which promotes extravagant marriage, etc., and dowry being normalized. And that there's a second question about how do you explain even college-educated women committing suicide instead of simply walking out of a marriage. And then Swarna's is about liberalization and the return of dowry and dowry variations with the example of the SEZs. And is there any information about whether these new districts are where the practice has spread? So Bharati, which one would you like to take?
In regard to the even educated women are trying to commit suicide and not get out. We have had a number of calls from highly educated professional women earning a huge amount. I'm just quoting examples, earning a huge amount, but they would talk to us on phone, but would not want to take an action. Why? Well, anybody can differ with whatever my understanding is. One is that whenever a woman has children, she thinks 1,000 times before leaving for 2 reasons. One is that perhaps she is not capable of having a living on her own along with her children. One thing. Second is that it is she can earn, she can do that, but she thinks her children should not be deprived of the family life. So somewhere children come in the picture and the woman does not want to leave the violent family. Then if we do not forget, and we should not forget, the onus of the reputation, what we call in Hindi izzat, lies on the head of the woman before and after marriage. she carries that. Supposing she does anything, then her natal family will be also, they will earn a bad name, and her marital family also. So she's squashed between the two. And when she's not able to make her choice because of this squashing, there are suicides happening. I think we work on the empowerment. We work on the economic empowerment. We work on the education empowerment. We need to work on the empowerment of the personhood of the person. Whether you are highly educated or not educated, whether you are able to earn 500 rupees or 50,000. Unless we build this personhood of an individual, I think these are the incidences that are happening. This is my understanding. And it can be challenged anywhere. Why does that woman who is earning so much and who works at a very high level, maybe she is earning as much as her partner, and even then she is not able to get out of that entrenchment?
Yeah. That sense of self, and also this mistaken idea that it's actually better for children to be in a family, even if it's a dysfunctional family.
True.
Sharada, would you like to take up Swarna's question about liberalization?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about SEZs in particular, but I think the way, especially, I think Vasanthi Devi has documented how dowry emerges in and around Madurai, for example. So where there is a rise in disposable income, right? So where that income allows you to spend on things, I think, the practice of dowry actually spreads faster. But I think in this current context, SEZs, no SEZs withstanding, the fact that, people have this mobile phone and they can get so much of information about goods and being able to buy them, I think doesn't, so the kind of economy we are operating in is very different from this place-based economic activity that creates or propels a particular practice. So I don't know if I'm making sense, Swarna, but I'm happy to talk about this later. But I do want to say something about this impression about prominent personalities and so on and so forth. I mean, when I talked about current education, focusing so much on individual success in terms of grades and incomes and so on and so forth, this is really the point, right? You can be highly educated. We know of highly educated IAS officers, medical doctors. I can give you examples from the Canadian context where highly educated medical doctor died because of intimate partner violence. Her husband is also a medical doctor, right? So the point is, it is about self-esteem. It is about emancipation. I think we have to stop using the word empowerment. I think the word is really emancipation. It's about dignity. It's about my identity. Does my identity derive out of marriage? Then there is a problem. We have not done enough work, right? And in terms of role models, prominent personalities, of course, they have a responsibility. They cannot hide behind this thing of, we are only doing what is happening in society. They are thought leaders and they are the gold standard of behavior, and they have to be held responsible for the sort of good or bad things that they are promoting. But having said this, this is what I want to say. Women lack role models on the whole, right? I think when I was growing up, I was like, who are my role models? There's no point in telling me Indira Gandhi is your role model. My role model has to be someone that I can relate to, right? Somebody who's like my mother, or somebody that I feel like, yes, if you can do it, I can do it. And that, I think, is really the crux of the problem. And honestly, when I think of, yes, we are actually talking about UNICEF ambassadors who are prominent film stars, I think that's done basically to raise money. But can I relate to Priyanka Chopra as the UNICEF ambassador? I cannot, right? So I think promoting role models who are real, who are in the same sort of milieu, I think is really the key if we want to address some of these problems. But I think newspapers and social media actually talk about Priyanka Chopra wore this very nice dress paying 53,000 rupees. You can also get it. Click on this link and this is how you order it. I mean, it's not at all helpful, right?
One last point I would like to make over here is that, see, in lot many cases and instances, we will see that the mental health aspect is always neglected. We need many more people, professionals who would be working on the mental health. And if we take care of the mental health issue in general, I think many things can be sorted out. That's the last two-line statement I should like to make.
Okay, Akila, 1 minute.
Sure. I just want to make my closing remarks on something else. I think we've been quite critical about society, rightly so today, and maybe we've left off like sort of, institutions a little too easily. And I want to sort of talk about police and courts and law enforcement authorities who I don't think have come through at all. Dowry Prohibition Act and other laws that protect women are now maligned. A lot of protections that are available in law are diluted. We now know how difficult it is to institute complaints under these laws. There is very little support that is given to a woman who dares to report an instance of dowry. There is so much pressure to settle or to reconcile within the family. And in this context, we see such a harmful rise of, this rhetoric of abuse of law, of misuse of law, how when you give a law that protects women or quote unquote favor women, it is, abused and used as a weapon, etc. So I think this trend is highly disturbing, and we need to ensure that our institutions don't use this language. They don't carry this attitude. Yeah. So that's the opposite of empowerment.
Sharada, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just one point that I wanted to make earlier, but it's coming back very nicely with what Akila said is, I mean, during COVID, we talked about how some of these child marriages have increased and all of it. What has happened during COVID is also the deprioritizing of a number of and sort of really a lot of work that has been done on many fronts have really gone, we have really gone several steps back. It's not just polio immunization and TB immunization, but a lot of work on, women's rights and things like that have really taken a back seat. Now, related to that is, we talk about the police and courts. It's also the parliamentarians, right? It's about also the institutions of our democracy that get eroded during such times, right? Because everybody is busy talking about other things. Everybody is talking about how can I keep a job when I'm sitting at home and so on and so forth. So I think there are sort of these larger, I really liked it when Bharati said, and we have to do a lot of work at the yeah. But we have to also do a lot of work at the micro level.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Last thing about the law enforcement agencies, Akila, I am a very big critic. Lot of trainings are going on. There is least sensitivity. When a woman goes to the police station, she dare not go. But if she goes, she says, your place is in your husband's family. If you go, we have experiences all these things. If you go to an NGO, that's the last thing you should go. That means they do not want this woman to be helped. And they want to push her back. I am not finding fault with the police as such, but because these police people who are there, they are a part of our society where this this kind of structure is already there. And they go through a lot of trainings, police and even judiciary to some extent, or to a large extent. Now, what training they go through is all informative. We need attitudinal change, that kind of training and training modules that can affect their thinking processes and their behavior processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very important point. I think we've come to the end of the session. I said I was told 3 to 5. So I think Swarna says we also end up doing one-off trainings. Swarna, I think this is your cue to expand on your point as well as close the session.
No, I just wanted to say that I'm in agreement with Bharati. We kind of do these in and out. We don't have processes. We don't have long-term back and forth. We're not, to shift training, to shift thinking, you have to have long conversations and many points of conversation, but you will get 1 hour with great difficulty with 30 people out of a 10,000 member sector. And then you have to just hope, do your best and hope for the best. So I agree, Bharati. I think we should start with this panel and renew our efforts on this question again in the coming year. I want to thank all of you for I think what is going to be an education for most people who watch, and just you took the time, you explicated so clearly that people can learn even if they had never thought of this before. This is exactly what I had hoped would happen today. And I am really grateful to you, more than I can express in all the words I possess in any language. So thank you so much for making this possible. And for those of you who came and attended, you know that this is the second of 16 days. We have many more sessions like this. And our calendar link will just go on the chat in a minute. So you can get it from there and register. Thank you again, everybody. I mean, this is all I have to give you.